Cody, thank you so much for chatting with us. What is your initial reaction to the results of this election?
I think if we look at this result and compare it to what we might have thought we were going to have 6 months ago, it is a drastically different expectation. We thought this was going to be a massive conservative landslide majority victory, and now we see Mark Carney most likely having a minority government. There's still a slim chance of a majority, but I think we're going to settle on a minority government. So a huge change. I think it's reflective of what we've seen in the polls since Mark Carney's taken office, which again was only a handful of weeks ago. So I think it's definitely an interesting turn of events compared to what we were expecting for years of how this next election might have turned out.
Why do you think voters picked this prime minister this time around?
I think it was definitely that threat of Donald Trump played a role. We hear this conversation of potentially annexing aspects of Canada, threats to our national sovereignty, the tariff rhetoric. And I think Mark Carney just sort of had that more convincing message at this point in time. I think we saw, this rhetoric of him being a central banker. Some of that was levied against him, some of that rhetoric. He also did a very good job nuancing his message in a way to play up the benefits of his role in those financial positions, while also kind of avoiding some of the rhetoric of the more negative messaging associated with his tenure, especially with the Bank of England. There was some messaging near the end of the campaign that tried to frame him in a specific way, and luckily he was able to work around that. And I think Pierre Poilievre spent his whole tenure as opposition leader framing a very specific message against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, against the carbon tax. And then all of a sudden that key messaging simply disappeared. And he had to try to pivot as significantly or as quickly as he could. And I don't think he was able to do that in enough time. And of course, we're going to see what the future for Pierre Poilievre is.
Yeah, your thoughts also on Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre losing his seat in the riding of Carleton to the Liberals, a seat Poilievre has held for almost 2 decades.
I think it's going to be so hard to tell what played a factor in that. The Conservatives went up almost 20 seats nationwide. Their vote share increased to one of the largest vote shares they've had in the past several elections, but we have the party leader losing his seat. I'm not sure if that's a referendum on him and his own riding. His riding was slightly redrawn. There was an increase of civil servants, typically left-leaning voters who moved into the riding of Carleton. There was also that long ballot initiative. I think there was close to 90 candidates in the riding of Carleton in a specific attempt to push for electoral reform. So Pierre Poilievre's in a really difficult position because the party increased by almost 20 seats. It increased its vote share, but he does not have a seat in the House of Commons. And that was his whole pitch against Mark Carney for the past several weeks. Mark Carney doesn't have a seat in the House of Commons. He's unelected right now, and now he finds himself in that position. I'm hearing he might try to run in a federal by-election. They're going to see if perhaps a Conservative MP will step down, and Pierre Poilievre might run in a safer seat. But again, I think his leadership definitely took a blow last night. In this election, he was supposed to win in a landslide, and now he didn't win, and he didn't even win his own seat.
The NDP lost party status, and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh lost in his riding and has resigned as party leader. Your thoughts on what happened there, Cody?
I think what happened is this ended up being a two-party race. This was a referendum on Canada, some of the rhetoric that we've been seeing, and I've commented before on APTN some of the issues with that by framing Canadian nationalism as a central election issue. We see that decline in the rhetoric about Indigenous nationalism and sovereignty. But that's what it turned into. It was a referendum on, I really think it wasn't a policy election. And that's one thing that the NDP can sort of gain some traction is some of those policy issues. It really wasn't a policy election to the same extent that we've seen in a while. I think social policy is going to, in theory, take a little bit of a back burner in the next few months. It's going to focus on economic policy and perhaps foreign relations to an extent that Justin Trudeau didn't focus on to that same extent, and there was just no way for other parties to break through that mold of that two-party dialogue. So we've also seen over the years the NDP's fortunes have slowly started declining anyway, but I think the drastic drop all of a sudden is a little bit beyond his control. For the past several years, he's tried to carve out his message, but he's just not broken through, and I think that can be a performance factor. He won his last leadership review, but there was a lot of conversation that he probably shouldn't have. There was some debate about that leadership review, so I think the timing was right for him to resign.
The number of Indigenous MPs look like it dropped a bit to just 7 Indigenous MPs compared to the previous 11 Indigenous MPs. Do you think these voices are just as important now than before?
I think what's an interesting part of that question is the number of new voices that we're seeing when it comes to Indigenous members of Parliament. So we have some returning people. Leah Gazan for the NDP, one of the very few NDP victories last night. We have Jaime Batiste for the Liberals, has been re-elected as well. But then we have what looks like about 5 new Indigenous MPs, and some of them have very deep and extensive resumes. So Mandy Gull-Masti for the Liberals, former Grand Chief of the Cree Nation, Northern Quebec, a very extensive resume. Then we also have the Conservatives elected 2 very strong voices. We had Billy Morin, former Chief of Enoch Cree Nation, and we have Ellis Ross, Haisla Nation Councillor-in-Chief. Both of them are pro-economic development, pro-resource development. And I think it'll be interesting to see if Billy Morin or Ellis Ross are offered shadow cabinet secretary positions in those files as very strong First Nations representatives.
Cody, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you for having me.